I will be reading Matthew 18:21 through 35 from the ESV. Then Peter came up and said to him, "Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. So the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, 'Have patience with me. I will pay you everything.' And out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. But when the same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, and he seized him and began to choke him, saying, 'Pay what you owe.' So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you.' He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Then his master summoned and said to him, 'You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you?' And in anger his masters delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart."
Thank you, JB, for reading. Appreciate that very much. On Sunday nights, we're kind of taking a practical take on things, picking up something from the morning sermon and thinking about how to become equipped, how the church is to be equipped in something practical in terms of discipleship. And so as we looked at interpersonal conflict this morning, it brings up the topic of forgiveness. So I want to talk about how you go about forgiving tonight. Every time I think about forgiveness, I'm always reminded of a 4-year-old who was learning the Lord's Prayer. If you have learned it in the KJV or the New King James, it says, "Forgive us our trespasses." And this 4-year-old, when he prayed it, he said, "Forgive us our trash baskets, as we forgive those who put trash in our baskets." Isn't that great? I love that. It's so good. So we know we're supposed to forgive, but how do we go about it? And how do we know if we're actually forgiving people who put trash in our baskets? Okay, so that's what I want to think about. We know we're supposed to do it. How do we go about it? I want to talk briefly about what it is, what forgiveness is, and then we're going to look at how to go about it from this parable, the unforgiving servant, that JB read just a minute ago. Share some insights that are not original to me. There are things that have helped me in working through this parable that I want to relay tonight and hope will be helpful to you. Let's pray. Father, we're so grateful for this teaching of Jesus, so important, so rich, more than we can bring out in a few minutes of thinking about it. But as we do, I pray, Father, that you would open our eyes to see it, to be receptive to it, that we would be more motivated and equipped to forgive as we have been forgiven. We ask for your help and for your grace in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so as we think about what it is, I didn't put that up there, how to forgive others, that's what we're going to talk about. Right here in verse 21, Peter comes up to Jesus and he says, "How often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said to him, basically, far from it. I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. So you've heard teaching on this before. 7 times far exceeds what would have been kind of a standard quota. A rabbi probably would have said 3 is good. Peter says, how about 7? And Jesus says, no, a long way from that. Let's try 77. Or depending on the way it's translated, it could be 490, 70 times 7. And it doesn't matter however you look at that. The point is, don't count. 77 is kind of interesting. I'm already running on a rabbit trail. In Genesis, you remember Lamech? And it talks about the 77-fold revenge of Lamech. Some people suggest that Jesus is alluding to that. In other words, saying like that 77-fold revenge, you're going to be 77-fold forgiveness if you're going to be in the kingdom of God. So we're supposed to forgive greatly. This is a lot of forgiving. Don't calculate. This is just a way of life to be constantly and abundantly forgiving. So what is it when Peter says forgive him? What exactly is that? So here's just a quick definition. To forgive is to give up resentment and any claim to repayment for the mistake or offense of another. That language is carefully chosen. Resentment having to do with internal repayment is often what we consider to be due us, and giving up is really a good word for what forgiveness is. A few things to notice: that it is action, not feeling. Forgiveness is action, not feeling. In fact, when something really needs to be forgiven, we usually don't feel like doing it. So forgiveness is not... You can come to feel forgiveness. I think eventually you come to feel it, but initially it's something you do. It's an act. And that act is giving up or letting go. That's what the word means. It has to do with giving up, letting go, releasing. So instead of holding on to resentment, you let go of it. Instead of holding out for repayment, you cancel it. You let it go. That's what it entails. And resentment, it's important to include that because it points to the internal. You notice at the end of the parable, how is it we're supposed to forgive? From the heart. Okay, so this action is something that comes from in here. It's got to be internal, not just external. So that's what it is. Now, how to do it. I want to bring out 4 steps from the parable of the unforgiving servant for how to forgive. Number 1, name the wrong. So we start with truth-telling. We start with a recognition that wrong has been done. So in 24 and 25 of Matthew chapter 18, you have a wrong that's done. You've got a servant defaulting on a big debt. When the master began to settle, one who was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. So there's a debt that's owed. It cannot be paid. It's a great debt. So 10,000 talents. A talent was the greatest denomination of currency, and 10,000 was the largest number for which the Greek language has a specific word. So it's a way of saying incalculable debt, infinite debt, the biggest thing that you can imagine. This man owed an infinite debt and could not pay it, so an accounting has to be made. There's an injustice. There's something that's wrong that's got to be made right. So that's what's happening here. So it's similar. We might compare it to when a person is unable to make a car payment. That's a lousy comparison, although it doesn't feel that way sometimes, does it? It feels like 10,000 talents, infinite debt. You can't pay the car payment, and so what does the bank do? They repossess the car. And we understand to be right, but it doesn't feel that way sometimes. You feel like, the bank's the bad guy. But it's a debt that's owed, can't be paid. The bank has the right to call in that debt, to repossess that vehicle. We want, though, to shift the blame. And that's why naming the wrong is so important, because naming the wrong is what makes the difference between forgiving and excusing. They're not the same thing. This is why we name it and we recognize this is a wrong that's been done. It is not excusable. So a little clarity. This was helpful to me in making this distinction. Excusing says a person couldn't help it or didn't mean it or wasn't to blame, therefore will not be held accountable. So in the case of a car being repossessed, it would be saying, it would kind of be taking the blame off of the person and saying they could not help it. They were not, that you can't hold them responsible. That's excusing. Forgiving is not the same thing as excusing. Forgiving begins with the recognition that a wrong has been done and must be accounted for. Forgiving does not excuse a person's behavior as acceptable. It recognizes it as immoral, unjust, and unacceptable. And I think this is one of the reasons that people have a hard time with forgiveness, is because it feels like if I forgive, it's saying that thing was not a big deal that you did. No, it is a big deal. Forgiveness is not excusing. Excusing is saying, yeah, we're going to let that go. Not a big deal. Forgiveness recognizes it actually is a big deal. An injustice has been done, a wrong has been done, and accounting needs to be made. So when you name the wrong, you're recognizing that the pain and the hurt you feel is legitimate. If you've been wronged and you find it hard to forgive, you don't want to forgive, that's a legitimate feeling. A wrong has been done and a right needs to be done to account for it. That there's a desire for justice. That's one of the resistance we have to forgiveness. We want justice to be done. And that's good. A desire for justice is good. The problem is we tend to take it to vengeance. We want revenge. Got to kind of rein that in a little bit. But just recognize we name the wrong, and recognizing an injustice has been done. It needs to be lamented. This is where counseling is helpful, whether that's pastoral or professional. Being able to talk with somebody. And I want to make a point of clarity on gossip. Okay, if you're dealing with somebody who's wronged you in a way that is traumatic to you, you're having a really hard time dealing with it, it is not gossip to go talk to an elder or a minister or a counselor. That's not gossip. There may be a place where you need to lament the wrong that has been done to you. In the case of marriage sometimes, it can be really helpful to recognize a wrong has been done, to name it. You don't excuse it, you recognize that it's been done. Okay, so name the wrong. Second, see the person. It's easy to focus only on the wrong that's been done and fail to see the person, a fellow image bearer who is broken. So in verses 26 through 27, the servant in his brokenness comes into view. 26 to 27, so the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything." And out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave the debt. Okay, so he says, "I will pay you everything." He can't do that. It's an infinite debt. There's no way he can pay. The master, though, has pity, and so forgave him. Now that translation, "out of pity," I think we struggle with that sometimes. It sounds condescending to pity someone. We say, I don't want you to pity me. But really, it's to feel sorrow for someone else's situation, to feel sorrow for their suffering, to feel sorrow, a brokenness for the hardship that they are in. It's to have sympathy, to have compassion. One translator of this passage actually translated it empathizing, that the master empathized with the servant. He felt some of what it was like to be in that servant's position. That's seeing the person, to actually see them in their in a situation that needs some sympathy or compassion. Classic example of this would be the playground bully. The problem kid on the playground who's treating kids in an inexcusable way, right? You can't excuse bully behavior. But we've often seen that sometimes that what's behind that problem behavior is a heartbreaking situation at home. And it does not excuse the bullying behavior, but it does make you more compassionate towards the bully. You see them as more than a bully. You see them as somebody who's been broken and beat down. And so you have compassion. That's a classic example. It's compassion, not duty, that's the heart of forgiveness. So we forgive, not just because it's our duty as Christians, but because as Spirit-indwelled believers, we come to have compassion for other people. And out of that, forgiveness comes. So practically, what do we do with this? Shift from judging to understanding. Judging is laser focused on what the person did wrong. It's got a narrow view. Judging sees you did wrong, and accounting's got to be done. That's judging. Understanding seeks the wider view. Understanding asks, why did they do that? What led to that? What is it that they might be going through? And you may not see it all, but you're getting a wider understanding of the person and recognizing there's probably reason for compassion on that person. Identify with them as a fellow sinner in need of mercy. This was the failure of the unforgiving servant in the parable. He failed to see himself in the person who owed him a relatively small debt. He's just been forgiven this great debt. And then somebody comes and says basically the same words to him, asking for some mercy, some patience, and he cannot even see, I was you. A few minutes ago, I was in that same place, only with a larger debt. He could not see that you and me, we're just alike. I'm a fellow sinner too. I'm in need of mercy and grace too. We do see the wrong. We don't excuse the wrong. We understand that other things have contributed to it, and we are all sinners. When you fail to see that the other person that you are a sinner like them, then you end up doing things like this. It's pretty violent. He seized him, choked him, threw him in prison. Merciless, ruthless. That's how we get this merciless outrage when we forget that I'm a sinner in need of mercy too. Just heartbreaking example this week. I've even quoted a man named Sam Albury before. I don't know if you're familiar with that name or have heard about this man before. He's a pretty well-known, prominent author and speaker, Christian author and speaker. And he had a moral failure that came out in public. He has long been open about same-sex attraction, but he was living as a celibate man out of his deep conviction of Christian faith. And it came to light that he's had a moral failure, not to the extent that we might imagine, but still serious, and there's consequences for it, as there should be. It is inexcusable sin, and in a position public prominence and leadership, there needs to be some repercussions for that. But if you get on social media, what you find is merciless outrage, just excoriating the man. And it's heartbreaking to me. Not because his sin is not a big deal, it is, but because his faith appears to me to be genuine faith, and he appears to be a man who's struggling the same way that I struggle, just with a different temptation, who has failures just like I have failures in different things. And I want to get on social media and say, check the log in your eye. Can't you see that you're a sinner too? Can't you see that we all need mercy? No, we don't excuse his sin, but we don't crucify him either. See the person. A person in need of grace, a person not that different from you. That's really the heart that forgiveness comes from. Number 3, cancel the debt. This is the essence of forgiveness. This is really what it is. It is a canceling of debt. In the Lord's Prayer, the model prayer, Jesus uses debt as a synonym for sin. That's intentional. It helps us to think about debt canceling debt to understand what forgiveness is. So we see this act of forgiveness in verse 27. Out of pity for him, the master of the servant released him and forgave him the debt. Great debt, 10,000 talents, more than the man could ever pay. Released him, forgave it. That releasing, this forgiveness in this case, is a release from moral and legal obligation or consequence. It's not held over you anymore. That weight comes off your shoulders. You don't owe it. You don't have to pay it. You get to leave, and you're restored as a servant. You're not going to prison. There's no consequence. You're released. Man, you can just, you feel you can breathe. Can you imagine that? The NIV translates it this way. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. That's a great picture. The picture of debt being canceled helps us practically in forgiving, because that's what forgiveness is. Forgiveness means you will no longer demand payment. How do I know if I'm doing it? How do I know that I'm forgiving a person? I'm not demanding payment. When we've been wronged, we want them to pay for it, right? In some way. That's what the unforgiving servant does. What does he say? Pay what you owe. When we've been wronged, that's what we want. Pay what you owe. It could be dollars. If we've been wronged in a way that cost us financially, what do we want? We want the wrongdoer to pay for it, to pay dollars. Not every wrong is in dollars. If someone's wronged us in a different way, we want them to pay for it in humiliation or suffering. It sounds bad to say it that way, but I think that's how it is. We want them to feel bad. We want them to feel some degree of suffering for what they've done. And in a lack of forgiveness, what we do is we hold out relationship until we get what we're due. We hold out relationship until we get what we're due. When I was doing college ministry, I did a sermon on honoring your father and mother. It just happens to be that this illustration came to mind on Mother's Day. Did not plan that, but I was teaching on honoring your father and mother. And it seemed like a fairly non-controversial subject to me, but I had a young lady come to me afterwards, and she said, I understand I'm supposed to honor my mom, but you don't know what my mom has done. You don't know how badly my mother failed me my whole life. See, that's why it's important to name the wrong. You can't just say, well, it is inexcusable for a parent to not be a parent, for a parent to not love, for a parent to not provide, for a parent to not nurture. That's inexcusable. They owed that. That was their responsibility from God. And so you lament it with somebody that's going through that. But what she was struggling with was, so I'm supposed to honor my mom, but my mom does not deserve that. And what she learned about herself was that she was still demanding that her mom pay. Her mom owed her. Her mom failed to pay what a mom should pay. And she was holding out relationship until she got what she was probably never going to get from her mom. So forgiveness is saying I'm going to quit demanding what I should have received. Okay, that does not excuse the mom. It just means I'm not going to demand any longer that I get from you what's due me. Think about marriage. It happens all the time in marriage that we hold out closeness. We hold out closeness of relationship until the other changes. Forgiveness means I'm not going to demand payment for my love. I'm not going to demand that you get your act together before I love you. Forgiveness means I'm not going to demand what's due me. I'm just going to give. I'm going to give to you freely, even though you owe me. That debt's canceled. So I'm going to relate to you as if we're even. We're square. I don't know if that makes sense, if that helps. That's helpful to me, though. Forgiveness means you'll no longer demand payment. Think about that in people that you have a hard time forgiving. Are you still thinking about them as if you owe me something? There's a certain kind of behavior, a certain thing I want to get from you, and we're not going to really be good until I get that from you. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is not going to demand payment. Forgiveness also means that you will bear the cost. For the master to forgive that servant meant he had to eat the loss of 10,000 talents. An accounting has got to be made somewhere. A wrong has been done. Somebody's got to pay that. To forgive means you bear the cost. I'll give you a personal illustration. It's a silly one, but maybe it helps. I had a teenager who backed into my truck. And of course, I was kind of upset about it. It's minor damage. You can go out there and look, you won't even see it, okay? So terrible. The damage is just so little. But I wanted him to pay. And it's right, isn't it? I mean, he did the damage. If you do damage to somebody's vehicle, isn't it right that you pay to fix that damage? Yeah, it's right. But I don't know, is that right for me to demand that he pay it back? So this is where you recognize the wrong, you name the wrong, you see the person. This is what's so important, to see the person. And I'll brag on my wife again because she helped me to see the person who backed into my truck. And when I saw the person, then it no longer seemed right to demand payment. But that's not easy. Because if I don't demand that he pay for my truck, then who has to pay for it? I do. So that's what forgiveness is. I'm not going to demand that you pay it, and if there's any hardship to be had, I will have it. So true forgiveness means I'm going to sacrifice for your good, even if that means that I sacrifice the sense of justice that I'm hungry for. It doesn't feel good to forgive somebody. It feels a little bit like excusing a sin. It's not, but it feels that way. It feels like you ought to be getting yours, and you're not. But bearing that hardship and saying, if there's any hardship to be had, I'll have it. That is the nature of forgiveness. So what does this look like? Just one example. It looks like when you have an argument with somebody, maybe let's say it's your spouse or a sibling. You have an argument. Clearly, they're more at fault than you are. And you're going to hold out until they apologize because they owe you an apology. But you're not perfect in it either. And your part may, in your eyes, be minor. You might have had the smaller fault, but it's still a fault. So if you go and apologize, what is that? Man, that is hard, isn't it? When you feel like they ought to be apologizing, but you go apologize for your own part, that's hard. It takes humility to do that. But that's what forgiveness looks like. It means I'm not going to demand that you pay me. In fact, I'm going to own hardship in this. I'm going to suffer in the act of doing you good. That's what forgiveness looks like. Sacrifice for their good, even if I am not getting what I want or what I need. Okay, number 4, mend the relationship. And this is where it gets thorny. So thankfully, I'm almost out of time. We got somebody ring that bell. We want to strive to restore connection and harmony in a relationship. Now, you don't want to take this parable out of its context. If you look back at the preceding passage, and I won't put it all up there, but I'll just put a little bit of it. What is the passage that prompts Peter's question and Jesus' parable? It's a teaching about reconciliation. Just this one verse, if your brother sins against you, go tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother. So Jesus was teaching on reconciling with, restoring a relationship with somebody where their wrong has been done. Not just forgiving, but reconciling. And that prompted Peter to ask about forgiveness and Jesus to teach on forgiveness. And I want to suggest you can't separate this teaching. You can't take away reconciliation from forgiveness. They belong together. Jesus, let me think of how to say this. Some people want to draw a clear line between forgiveness and reconciliation. Say it's one thing to forgive, it's another to reconcile. And I understand that to a degree. But we can't put a hard line between those two things. Jesus links them together. They are so closely related to each other. Forgiveness is not just for inner healing of the heart. That's what a lot of people want to say. Forgiveness is just something you got to let go of in your heart so you can heal and move on. Forgiveness is also the means to outer healing of relationships. This is what it takes to get along with people. To reconcile relationships is forgiveness. So we forgive, not just to let go of something that's eaten us up inside so we can be more loving from the heart. It is actually to mend a relationship that has been broken, to restore it, to reconcile. So if I say that I forgive someone, but there's no openness or effort to restore the relationship, then is that really forgiveness? I know we want to make some exceptions, but in general, if I say I forgive, but I'm not open to relationship or I'm not working toward relationship, is that really forgiveness? I would suggest to you that it's not, that we're stopping short of the full measure of what forgiveness is meant to do. On the flip side, and this is where the exception is, if there's no acknowledgement of wrongdoing and no change on the part of the other, can there be full reconciliation? Okay, well, there may be some exceptions, but in general, I'd say no. Both of those are important, that we work towards reconciliation and that we recognize that some things can prevent reconciliation. I'm going to be really quick about this, but in Matthew 18:28 through 34, what you see there is the relationship between the master and the servant has been reconciled by forgiveness, but then it's imperiled by the behavior of that forgiven servant. Do you see that? The servant is forgiven, there's a restored relationship, but then it's imperiled by his behavior, and so then that relationship is put out of sorts again. I think there's a takeaway in that for us, that reconciliation is not always possible, that it does depend on the behavior and the attitudes, the willingness of both parties. And there's other things to include in that as well. So here's something that helped me. This is David Pallinson. He uses these terms of attitudinal and reconciled forgiveness. And we don't have time to go fully into how he gets there, but it's illustrated in this parable that we are supposed to forgive, but there's the possibility of relationships still being out of sort, even if we're genuinely forgiving. So a way to think about this is, while attitudinal forgiveness must always happen, reconciled forgiveness is not always possible. So by attitudinal forgiveness, that means the posture of my heart, my willingness to forgive, that's never an option. We're supposed to forgive. Whoever the enemy is, whoever the wrongdoer is, whatever they've done, we're called to forgive over and over and over again. We don't get to hold out and say, I'm going to wait on an apology and then I'm going to forgive. Our attitude needs to be that of constant, ready forgiveness no matter what. But for forgiveness to reach that full measure of amended, reconciled relationship, that is not always possible. Two instances. One would be that of a victim and an abuser. A victim may forgive their abuser, but that does not mean they should have a relationship with that abuser. That would not be wise. So I don't think you're unforgiving You're just being discerning and wise and recognizing a full reconciliation of relationship is not always wise. It's not always possible. But the willingness to forgive even someone who has done inexcusable wrong to you, yeah, you're called to that because of the great debt you've been forgiven of. And then we could use the example from today, which is a theoretical. Euodia and Syntyche, remember that disagreement? Let's just say Euodia was willing to forgive, but Syntyche might have held on to her grudge. Okay, now I don't think that happened. I don't imagine that happened. But what if it did? What if only one of them was willing to work on the relationship and the other one wasn't? Well, reconciliation's probably not going to happen. So it's not always possible. From your heart, the attitude, yes, it's always there. Reconciled relationship, not always possible. So we should aim for it. Where it's wise and where it's possible, we should aim at reconciling. And if in our church family, if we find ourselves saying, yeah, I forgive them, but I'm not going to have a relationship with them, maybe we wouldn't say that out loud, but if we're saying it in our heart, then I would question, is that really forgiveness? Because forgiveness is going to be open to relationship. Again, put an asterisk there. There's some reasons why there might not be a relationship, but we ought to desire and aim for reconciliation where it's possible and where it's wise. Okay, so there's our 4. Name the wrong, see the person, cancel the debt, mend the relationship if possible, and wise. But there's one more thing, and it's the big thing in the parable, that we should forgive and we can forgive great debts because we've been forgiven an infinite debt. We can't forget that. How is it that we're able to forgive people who've wronged us? Because we have been forgiven so much. And it's when we remember that it's going to flow through us. So you got to end with the C.S. Lewis quote. Just got to. He asked, how? How can we forgive the incessant provocations of life? We are constantly, incessantly provoked. How is it that we can forgive? Only, he says, I think, by remembering where we stand. To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. We can forgive great things because God has forgiven an infinite debt that we owed. We cannot forget it. That's what the cross is telling us. Look at what God has done, paid for our sin. Now that ought to flow through us, that we ought to love and to forgive like that. Okay, pray you're encouraged and helped. If there's anything you need from the church tonight, anything we can do for you, if you're ready to put on Christ in baptism, be reconciled to God, I'd invite you to do that now while we stand and sing.